In the olden days, in the days when the kings used to fight battles, less people died during the battle and because of the injury, but way more people died because of the infection which followed these injuries. When he returned back on 28th of September 1928, he found something interesting. But unfortunately, that's it. That's it he could do. He had neither the resources at St. Mary's Hospital nor the chemistry background which would be required. After her delivery, there was a lot of blood loss and the blood got contaminated. She was in massive sepsis. There was no way her life could be saved if not for this. When you talk about penicillin, you hear only the name Dr. Alexander Fleming, and little credit is given to Dr. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. So what do you understand by the word antibiotics? Now before I come to what exactly antibiotic is, I'm just reminded of a reel or a shorts which I saw recently where some idiot was trying to look down upon allopathic medicine, and he very confidently says, tell me one allopathic medicine which cures a disease and not just controls it. My answer is antibiotics. I mean, there cannot be anything which will cure a disease more than antibiotics do. You have a sore throat, you have a chest infection, you have an ear infection, you have a wound infection. Apart from all the symptomatic medicines, the most important thing that the doctor gives you is antibiotics. That is, these group of drugs which will act against and kill the bacteria and hence cure you from the disease. Now, these wonder drugs are antibiotics. In the current scenario, getting an antibiotic is very easy. Most of the time you don't even need prescription of the doctor. Unfortunately, you just go to the pharmacist and he'll give you so many antibiotics. But it wasn't the same always. In the olden days, in the days when the kings used to fight battles, to give you a perspective, less people died during the battle and because of the injury, but way more people died because of the infection which followed these injuries. It's also true that unfortunately the great Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Ji also had his end because of the infections which resulted because of the battle wounds which he got. So in the olden days, an infection most of the time meant death. So for the same reason, in the current scenario, we don't even hear about cholera, because even if it's there, it can be very easily treated with antibiotics. But it was not the same before. 100 years back, cholera, simple cholera, could kill people. In the current days, we hardly hear about syphilis. That is again because we have effective treatment against it, and hence it is not spread from person to person. But it wasn't the same always. So there was a day when this antibiotic was accidentally discovered and it changed the entire medical science for the good. It was the year 1928. The month was September. The day was 28th. What happened on that day? So there was a bacteriologist in St. Mary's Hospital, London, by the name Alexander Fleming. So what happened was Dr. Alexander Fleming obviously did all his work. He was growing some bacteria called Staphylococcus aureus. But then in between, it was his vacation time. So he left the lab. He went to vacation to Scotland. When he returned back on 28th of September 1928, he found something interesting. Apart from the fact that the lab was fully messy, he just found that the petri dishes where he grew the bacteria, I mean the bacteria, that's what the bacteriologists do. They grow the bacteria in different culture mediums, and so that they can understand, they can study and understand the various characteristic features of that bacteria. So he was basically growing a type of bacteria called Staphylococcus aureus, which is a very common bacteria. So when he came back and when he saw the petri dishes, it was unfortunately infected by fungus mold. Now what happened when he looked at it closely, around the fungus mold there was hardly any bacteria, while the rest of the petri dish obviously had the bacteria. So he took it under the microscope and had a very closer look at it. Now this fungus mold is called as Penicillium notatum. So what he observed, that there is some compound which is released by these fungus which are inhibiting the growth of the bacteria, that is Staphylococcus aureus. So this much information he got actually accidentally. So there was basically a fungus contamination, and around that fungus there was no growth of bacteria at all. So that sounded very interesting to him. So he was trying to analyze what could be the reason. So there is something in it, there is something in that fungus which is not letting that bacteria grow, right? So he wrote a paper on it, which ultimately got published in the next year, that is 1929. So where he says, when I woke up just after dawn on September 28, 1928, I certainly didn't plan to revolutionize all medicine by discovering the world's first antibiotic or bacteria killer. But I guess that was exactly what I did. But unfortunately, that's it. That's it he could do. He had neither the resources at St. Mary's Hospital nor the chemistry background which would be required to isolate that compound which is responsible for inhibiting the bacterial growth, nor purify it. So what would you do? He was desperate to get some external help to isolate this compound and help the mankind. So he tried to contact every possible person. Few responded, few didn't respond, but there was absolutely no significant growth in this until the year 1938 came. So what happened in 1938? In Oxford University, there was a professor of pathology by the name Dr. Howard Florey. He too had observed that certain fungus and certain bacteria somehow do not grow with each other. So obviously he was interested in it, and he was going through some papers where he noticed one of the paper written way back in 1929 by Dr. Alexander Fleming. So that lit even more interest. So he tried to contact Dr. Alexander Fleming and then discussed about it. So then he was all enthusiastic to get this into reality, to get that product which would kill the bacteria. So him along with this employee, Dr. Ernst Chain, began to work on this project. Obviously, considering the amount of resources they had, and of course, no denying the dedication they showed in the work, they were successful in extracting the compound and purifying it. So eventually, they did an experiment with 100 mice. Now, however unfortunate it may sound to animal lovers like us, it is how it is. The drugs, when they are discovered, they are injected on animals like mice, rabbit, and then only when it proves their efficacy in these animals, it is thought of testing in humans, and that's how it is. So they did an experiment with 100 mice where they injected these mice with this deadly bacteria, that is Staphylococcus aureus. So 50 of those mice, they also injected this extract, which later came to be known as penicillin, and the rest 50 they did not inject. And of course, needless to say that those 50 mice which got this medicine survived, while the others had a fatal death. So this gave them a little more confidence to even think of using this drug on human beings. So with these promising results on mice, it was the summer of 1940 when they began to think that we have enough data to carry out this experiment on humans. But you know what the problem was? Even if they got around 2000 liters of this extract from the fungus, that would not be enough to produce enough antibiotic to treat a human being. So that was their biggest concern as to how to produce more and more of this compound. So in the year September 1940, there was a police constable by the name Albert Alexander. Now do not get confused with this Alexander and Alexander Fleming. So let's call him as Dr. Alexander and and Albert Alexander as patient Alexander. So what happened to this constable? So while working in his garden, so he got a prick by one of the thorn. It's as simple as you can imagine. But this prick got contaminated by deadly bacteria like Streptococcus and Staphylococcus. So the infection just kept on growing, He started having abscess all around the face, around the eyes, then it spreads to the lungs. So he was in a very morbid situation, and that is when Dr. Flore and Dr. Chain came to know of this situation. So they offered to help, and they told that we have this new compound which is quite promising and we could try this on the Alexander, that is the patient. Of course, the hospital agreed because they had no other option and they were almost losing hope on treating this patient. So they started giving this injection to Alexander, the patient. See the coincidence. It was discovered by the doctor by name Alexander, and it was then given to the patient by the name Alexander. So 5 days into treatment, the patient started responding. He started getting better and better. But unfortunately, you know what happened? The medicine got exhausted. They had no more means to produce more medicine, and eventually the patient Alexander died. Another notable figure in the laboratory who worked with Dr. Flore and Dr. Chain was by the name Dr. Hetley. So he actually tried his best, used all possible containers to grow more and more of this fungus to yield more and more of this antibiotics. So eventually what happened in the year 1941, just before the United States got into the World War II, Dr. Flore and Dr. Hetley were invited to go to the United States, where they tried to produce as much of this antibiotic as possible. But of course, they were very, very sure that extracting this antibiotics from this particular fungus is not going to be the solution, because you will never get the enough dose of antibiotics that people would require during a war. So they began searching other means of getting this antibiotics. So that was a time when one of the laboratory employee got a jackfruit and it was infected by a yellow golden colored mold. So it looked interesting to them, and they tried to study that particular mold. So the name of that fungus was Penicillium chrysogeum. Now, one interesting thing about this fungus was it could yield the amount of the antibiotics 200 times more than the previous fungus would grow. So that was fantastic. That was outstanding. So which meant that they could now produce the antibiotics 200 times more than they could produce with the previous fungus. In the year 1942, a lady called as Annie Miller became the first civilian patient to be saved by this antibiotic. After her delivery, there was a lot of blood loss and the blood got contaminated. She was in massive sepsis. There was no way her life could be saved if not for this particular antibiotic. And of course, during World War II, this medicine proved its mettle. It saved so many lives which would have been lost if not for this particular antibiotic. To the extent that in World War I, pneumonia contributed 18% to death, while in World War II, it contributed less than 1%, all thanks to the antibiotics, that is penicillin. By the end of the war, American pharmaceutical companies were producing up to about 650 billion units of these antibiotics every single month. So that was the massive scale of production and of course the requirement. It changed everything. It changed the medical science. It changed the way how doctors looked at infection. Now infections were looking like treatable. Surgeries were not as scary as they would be simply because of the infection, which would spoil the entire hard work of the surgeon. But you know what the irony is? When you talk about penicillin, you hear only the name Dr. Alexander Fleming. As you can see, yes, of course, he was the first one to discover it, but he did very little in the actual contribution of getting penicillin to use. But even today, it is his name which has been used in the discovery of penicillin, and little credit is given to Dr. Flore, Dr. Chain and Dr. Hetley. But later, it was sort of amended, and then Dr. Flore, Dr. Alexander Fleming and Dr. Chain, all of them got Nobel Prize for Medicine for their contribution. But unfortunately, Dr. Hetley was left behind, which was later corrected in the year 1990, where honors were given to Dr. Hitley for his contribution too. So this September, in case if somebody is talking to you about antibiotics and the contribution of Dr. Alexander Fleming, yes, give him the due credit, but do not forget three other names: Dr. Flore, Dr. Chain, Dr. Hitley, along with all those laboratory workers who worked behind the scene to give us the magic medicine called as antibiotics.